Whether it's a moment that made you throw your book across the room, or a scene in a film that made you audibly gasp, there is no reaction quite like the first one. And once it's happened, there's no recreating that feeling from that same moment. I would venture to guess that most of us have a litany of moments, scenes, entire films and books we wish we could go back and rewatch and reread as if it were the first time again. And when it comes to the Hunger Games trilogy, I've got several, 13 in particular. Hey y'all, I'm the Geek Apprentice and welcome to the 5th annual Hunger Games month. For more information and an explanation as to how this came about and why it's November, feel free to click here to see a very old and very poorly made video about that very topic. Comment below if you think maybe I should just create a new version of that original video. Now, of course, with how many times I have reread and rewatched this series, I know what's coming up at every turn. Yet, I still enjoy my experience each time. In fact, I also tend to pick up on new things every time I go through them, which is quite fascinating. But that doesn't mean I don't have nostalgia for that initial shock that came with several moments throughout the trilogy. As such, I've created a list of my top 13 moments from the books and films that I wish I could re-experience for the first time. I did not include the prequel, and that's for two reasons. The first is that it would simply make the video far too long, and the second is that, well, I haven't reread it enough to have that nostalgia. That's not entirely true. There are definitely several moments that I still wish I could experience for the first time. Either way, my first point still stands, the video would be way too long. So with that, here are 13 moments from either the books or films that I wish I could go back and experience them and react to them as if it were the first time. Whether it was the book or the film, this was a heart-dropping moment. While I did see the first film before I read the first book, even when I went back and read the book, this moment still filled me with so much horror. I believe that had a lot to do with the fact that we get a lot more exposition from Katniss in the book leading up to this point. I mean, what a way to finish your first chapter! Now, I was lucky going into the theaters that I had not seen any trailers and thus was not spoiled for anything. So I expected that, of course, this girl Katniss is probably going to have her name called, but to have it be Prim's name that's called, and the authenticity of Katniss volunteering to take her place, that self-sacrifice, because as she says in the book, Prim is the only person whom she knows and is certain she loves, that added so much more depth. And that action of self-sacrifice in the face of the hopelessness that is District 12, we now know is what would spark the flame that would end up ending the capital regime and the big government of Panem and go back to a sane society as it once was, a constitutional democratic republic. All of that was sparked by this first intense moment, but we had no idea just what we were getting into. Another moment that thankfully trailers did not spoil for me, although I cannot remember for sure if this was ever in the trailers. Nevertheless, was not spoiled for me. I remember distinctly thinking, ooh, that's a twist when I first saw it. And I, for one, have never doubted Peeta's sincerity. I've watched, heard, and read dozens of reasons why Peeta is faking it, and they are all absolute garbage. Reading the scene in the book, especially with the inner thoughts of Katniss, didn't change my mind either. It makes sense that Katniss would be so skeptical, so hyper-vigilant, unsure. That's her nature based on how she was nurtured. I get it, I'd be the same way. This was the moment that told you two key things about Peeta. The first is that he knows how to move a crowd, but protect those he loves. And two, he knew that it would save Katniss more than it would him. It told you he was genuine, and that he did care about Katniss more than himself. Yes, it got some notoriety for him, I suppose, because wow, he's the boy who loves the girl, but he can't be with her because that would mean she has to die in order for him to win, blah, blah, blah. but really it made her the heartthrob, just as Haymitch says in the book. Not the biggest moment for sure, but definitely one that sticks out. This scene in particular, not only do I wish I could go back and re-experience it for the first time, but more specifically in the books rather than the film. I don't mind that my introduction to the series was the first film, especially since the others, I was able to experience the book first. But this scene in particular has so much nuance and depth that just couldn't be captured in the film. Now, I'm probably stating the obvious, but film adaptations can be done well, even though, yes, books are their own experience, and it's crazy how you can get so lost into a world, so lost in your imagination, that when you stop reading, you have to take a moment to sit back into reality. But it is particularly awesome when films can do an adaptation well, even if they can't do it perfectly, because again, two totally different forms of media. I do have a video about that, by the way. And while I stand by both the books and the films, y'all know, if you've been around for a while, that the first film is actually my least favorite and I think the most poorly done of all the adaptations. And this was one area that just really couldn't live up to the book, no matter how hard they tried. In the film, it was just too cheesy romance. I know the cave scene is very long in the book, and they couldn't bring that to life, but I still feel like they could have done it better, and hence me wishing I could re-experience this scene for the first time via the books instead. Moving on to Catching Fire, my favorite of both the books and the films, the first in the trilogy that I read before seeing the film, Snow Visits Katniss. Look, we knew from the end of the first book by Haymitch's tone and what happened between Peeta and Katniss that things were about to get dark. Haymitch knows firsthand, though we don't know at the time, what happens when you basically laugh at the Capitol in order to win your games, when you throw it in their faces. Especially the elite, hence why his tone is so dark. So when you start catching fire, you know, things are about to get serious. She's gonna have to be a mentor, and she's dealing with PTSD. This is so dark. But still, her coming home and seeing that President Snow is at her house, all the alarm bells went off for me. That feeling of complete chills of, oh no, the president is at her home, she messed up, and she messed up bad. And that whole scene, you're thinking, no, there's no way she convinces him. There's just no way. Hence his line, no, convince me. She knows she can't. Such a chilling moment. The first real interaction with Snow, because so far all Katniss has said is, oh, he has snake-like eyes, which, yeah, really creepy. And he runs a scary country. But this moment, to go back and relive that, reread it for the first time, crazy. But to me, still not as chilling as the next one. I distinctly remember I was leaning back in my bed with my book and sitting up and practically screaming. My gasp was so loud. The chill just from head to toe. Oh my gosh, are you serious? Are you kidding me? She has to go back? It was so intense. Susan Collins, so good. This was my first moment of realizing, wow, reading is awesome. Because if you know my story, I didn't enjoy reading until I read this trilogy. Being so invested that this moment actually brought me to tears, and they portrayed it so well in the films, I believe. I don't have anything else to say. Please tell me below if you also practically screamed when you read this moment in the book. Similar to the last one, I do remember sitting up and gasping, but almost in a laughing way, like, oh my gosh, of course Peeta. He knows what he's doing. He's so smart. Katniss, she says it in the book, very smart idea, and she's trying so hard to play along with it. But also all of the nuance, too, of what she goes on to say about, isn't that all of our fear, though? Having a kid that ends up in the reaping? That's what everyone's dealt with for generations now. Well, 75 years. But just another one of those moments that you're like, dang, Peeta, you are so So good. So good, yet still authentic and genuine. I knew there was a third book, so I knew he couldn't die. But I was still so invested in what I was reading that it scared the living daylight out of me. But another reason I would love to re-experience this for the first time is not because I hate myself and want myself to have these horrible feelings all over again, but because of Katniss's reaction. And we find out later that that's when Finnick realized, yeah, no, she really does care about them, even though he's not really sure in what way, and he realizes Katniss doesn't really know in what way, or won't admit in what way, that she does, in a sense, need him. This was also yet another scene that made me realize how good the second film was. Watching it in theaters, chef's kiss, portrayed it so well. Here's what I remember from reading this moment. Feeling like all the blood was just drained from me. It was the mix of chills and the blood draining. I'm sure if there had been video footage of me reacting to this, I would have gone super pale, more pale than I already am. What a good way to end the second book. So good. And it makes you go, I have to read the next one. What's going to happen next? Now, lucky for me, I read these before the second, third, and fourth film came out, but the books were already there. And it was about 3 a.m. for me. I closed the book. I had to process. There is no District 12. Oh my gosh. And I snuck into my mom's room because I knew where Mockingjay was, grabbed Mockingjay, and started reading. I was so tired though, I only got an hour in. Are you noticing a trend that all these moments I say I want to re-experience for the first time, react to for the first time, are actually mostly depressing scenes? I don't know. I guess it's a cathartic thing, isn't it? For those of you that are big fans of the books like me, please comment below what was going through your head when you read this line. Katniss, there is no District 12. Moving on to the final book in the trilogy, Mockingjay, I skipped pretty far ahead as there wasn't much shocking me in the beginning of Mockingjay. Now, a lot of people hate on the third book, but I still love it. Is it harder to get through? Yes, it is a more difficult read just because you have to understand the state of mind of Katniss at this point. And the fact that the books are only from her point of view means that, yeah, she's a little messed up in the head. She's still a teenager. Severe trauma, severe PTSD, being thrust into a world that she is unfamiliar with. She's so confused. She doesn't know how to save Peeta. She doesn't know how to save her family. She's being told what to do all over again under the guise of, we're all equal here, see? No, you're not. You're not. Never will be. Don't fall for those lies. Reading the mindset of someone like that is really difficult to get through. But then you get to the rescue mission. And for me, I was so excited. Finally, Peeta's back. He's probably really disheveled. He's probably really skinny and it's probably really scary, but I was anticipating a really somber but beautiful, reunion. A somber but beautiful reunion. And reading that line, again, Susan Collins knows where to end her chapters so that you're like, I could end here, but also I really don't want to. Then his hands tighten around my throat. I'm sorry, what? But it wasn't even just that moment in particular. It was the whole next chapter, finding out just how bad the hijacking has gone. That he essentially hates Katniss now. You couldn't believe that would be possible. But that's how bad the trauma is. That's how bad the manipulation of these prisons inside the Capitol are. This was, I think, the first and only time I legitimately threw my book. I didn't think I'd be one of those people to have that kind of reaction, but I did. I threw it and I just cried for a little bit. So I was like, no, you can't do this. She doesn't really relate to Gale anymore, so that's out, and I'm fine with it, because Gale, I have my issues with Gale. He's great, but I have issues with him. Peeta was the only one who understood truly that wasn't Haymitch. You know? I love Haymitch. That sounded really dismissive. to read this again. And even watching it for the first time was crazy. When I saw this in theaters too, I knew this is where they were going to end the first part. And I knew there were a lot of people in the theater with me who hadn't read the book, so hearing their reactions was quite interesting. Whew, so chilling. I've asked multiple people about this, and I know I'm not the only one. I didn't realize Finnick died until way later, and I'm like, where's Finnick? Oh, that scene moves so fast, which a lot of people have criticized this moment, but again, you're reading it from Katniss's perspective. Everything is moving fast. But you reread it, and you're like, no, not Finnick. But you have to hurt the protagonist, and this is war. People are gonna die. It's one of those moments that I hear a lot of people say, like, no, he shouldn't have died. There's a lot of people that shouldn't have died. Is that not true to real life? Come on. I don't need to say much on this one. But for some reason, yeah, it's on my list of let's re-react to that for the first time if we could. This moment took me a little bit longer to process. Like, I knew Prim had been killed, but realizing the double explosion, that was Gale's idea. I never once believed he executed it. He meant it for the enemy, but also realizing, yeah, that could be turned back on you. And with someone as bad as Coin, yeah, of course she was going to use that. It wasn't how it was intended to be, but someone's going to get hurt. And it was Prim. But even though I couldn't quite articulate it at the time, I knew that when it comes to stories, protagonists have to grow. They have to hurt. They have to have a goal that they almost just can't achieve. And what was Katniss's goal? To save Prim. And she couldn't do that. And that's the real test. Can she move on knowing that her ultimate goal failed? Not because she herself failed, but it's just so heartbreaking because the whole book, the whole trilogy, you're thinking Prim should be safe now that she replaced her in the Hunger Games. But I think Katniss even has somewhere in the book where she realizes I can never protect Prim. As long as we are here, I cannot protect her from everything. And she has to allow Prim to grow a little bit too. The whole reason Prim is there is because she's standing up on her own. She wanted to be a part of the fight. She wanted to help. I'm not saying it's her fault, but that was actually a beautiful thing when you think about it, that Prim, at only like 14, was standing up for herself and wanting to help others and do something bigger than herself. She was inspired by Katniss. Not even necessarily to a fault, you could say that, but I don't take it that way. This moment I describe as feeling like a rock in my stomach, because you feel like you've failed with Katniss. Wasn't the whole point to save her? And now she's dead. And the rest of the book is really difficult to get through, but worth it. Shooting Coin. That whole sequence of her talking with Snow and kind of thinking, wait, is this not what I thought it was? I mean, she realizes Snow's gonna die anyway. But we've got a new threat, and it's Coin. She's just as bad as President Snow, and she can't allow that to be. Just the audacity. And depressing, but for her, she kind of feels like she has nothing else to live for. You know, after losing Prim, even though she loves Peeta, and yeah, she wishes she could still be friends with Gale, and I guess she kind of has her mom, but her mom is probably kind of distant now. She even talks about that. It's still, it's, I want to re-experience it because it's conflicting. On the one hand, I'm thinking, good for you, you know, like, you knew that this was for the betterment of everyone, you can't let this keep going, but I still hate that her mentality, though I understand it, is I have nothing else to live for. What do I care happens to me? And she was prepared for it. You have to understand serious mental conditions, PTSD, severe depression, severe anxiety. Like, there's names for these things and there's treatment for them too, but it's arduous. Quite the intense moment. I adored the epilogue. It was so perfectly written, so vague. We don't need to know the names of these children. We don't need a lot of details. We're given just enough to say that she did move forward, that she is trying to live life, and that idea of she's part of the generation that sacrificed everything so that her children and their children and their children after that, so on and so forth, could have a better life, and that they will only have to read about it in history books. And are we not living in that time right now? Like, you could say we're getting close to a time where we're going to become the generation that has to fight. But when you look back at like our grandparents and our great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents, they did that same thing that Katniss's generation did for her world, fictional world. They fought so that we could just read about the horror in history books. You think of things like, well, maybe I shouldn't say them out loud, but things from like world wars and such that we have the privilege of only having to read about them. That's it. We don't have to experience them. We read about them. Now, that said, there are countries experiencing that type of thing. Not America. We have our own issues, but other countries already or still have it way, way worse. And it's just such a beautiful thing to read. Because even though obviously she still has a lot of PTSD, and so does Peeta, and he's still fighting the Tracker Jacker venom 20 years later, whatever it is. She says 10, 15, something years like that, over a decade. Just the tone of the epilogue, she doesn't sound like a teenager. She sounds much, much older. And it's beautiful to see that resolution, that even though they have such a dark past, they did move on. And now there can be a beautiful future despite all the sacrifices, or because of those sacrifices. Maybe I'm not articulating it that well, but I adore the epilogue, and it felt like such a good ending and such a good finale. Because let's be honest, this is not a series you necessarily want more of. You don't want the pain to continue. So there it is, my list of 13 moments throughout the trilogy that I kind of wish I could go back and reread as if it was my first time again, because it's never quite the same after that. You know it's coming. That initial shock, that initial oh my goodness moment, whether it's a happy oh my goodness, which we don't get a lot of in this series, or very terrifying oh my goodness, very chilling, blood draining, rock in the stomach type moments. If you enjoyed this video, consider giving it a like and joining the Geek Mom by subscribing. Also, please comment below the moments you kind of wish you could relive, or some of your favorite moments from the books and the films, or either, whatever you choose to do. I am going to do my best to keep writing scripts and be able to get at least a few more videos out this month. I usually only end up doing like 2 or 3. I always have big plans, big ideas, but November is a chaotic month for my work and also adjusting to new life, if you will. Those that saw my last video, I did announce that I did get married. And so, yeah, adjusting to that, adjusting to living with someone else that I also have to share a room with. That's a new thing. Obviously, it's been great, but there's a lot of newness, getting used to things and working around his schedule, because I like to do these videos when no one's home, and that was easier when I was living by myself or when I was living with roommates who had a complete opposite work schedule to me. But it's all good things, of course. Be sure to pay attention to the community tab, because I will always update if I have to change my stream schedule, though it is normally Thursdays and Fridays at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Sometimes it's just that it gets pushed to be a little bit earlier or a little bit later. I don't usually have to cancel too often. And also a huge shout out to each of my channel members and patrons, especially Joking Batman, Geek Mom, Lorulian Sheep, and McToppler. Y'all are the best. But anyway, that's all for today. Happy Hunger Games month, and may the odds be ever in your favor.